Project EKIP. As much as I hate to admit it, the tin hat-loving conspiracy theorists are right. UFOs do exist, but they don't come from outer space, they come from Soviet Russia. Say hello to the EKIP, the Soviet aircraft that looks like it was made on Mars. Conceptualized back in 1978, this Russian flying saucer didn't resemble any other plane of its time, or our time, come to think of it. Its striking domed design was based on aircraft that didn't have any distinguishable fuselage, like certain stealth bombers and reconnaissance aircraft. The elliptical shape acted like one big wing, and with its turbojet engine, this strange saucer could rely on air cushion technology to take off and land. Just like the Ekranoplan. This meant it could take off from the ground as well as from the water. It was a truly alien concept, but an all-terrain aircraft was obviously appealing to the Soviet Union's military, no matter what it looked like. As the prototypes were being developed, engineers estimated that this highly aerodynamic design would only use 14 grams of fuel per passenger kilometer. For contrast, regular planes at the time used 45 grams of fuel per passenger kilometer. And the commercial implications this had were huge. So larger models, like the L3, were designed to carry up to 400 passengers, and others would even be able to carry passengers alongside their cars. But its fate, like so many other crazy Soviet vehicles, was bound to the demise of the Union. The EKIP program ground to a halt and, sadly, never took off. But if it had, could you imagine what our airports would look like today? I'd take a trip on a UFO over an economy seat any day. The Baratini-Bari VVA-14. A lot of these experimental Soviet vehicles look like they've been plucked straight out of sci-fi films, but the Baratini-Bari VVA-14 might just have inspired one. It closely resembles Star Wars' famous Millennium Falcon, but it was created in 1972, almost 5 years before Star Wars hit the silver screen. Looks like George Lucas has some serious explaining to do. The VVA stands for Vertikalno Vzletayuschaya Amphibia, or Vertical Takeoff Amphibious Aircraft if you're not fluent in Russian, like me. Like its title suggests, it could take off from the water and fly at altitudes of up to 33,000 feet, but it could also fly just a few feet over the ocean waves, using that previously mentioned wing-in-ground effect. It achieved this thanks to two large pods you can see connected to the fuselage. The two engines at the front create a cushion of air by directing the exhaust into narrow channels between the fuselage and the pods, allowing the plane to skirt over the waves. It needed this sea-skirting ability to destroy the USA's Polaris submarine missiles, which kept the Soviet Union awake at night during the Cold War. Initially, the VVA-14 was designed with 12 lift engines for vertical takeoff and landing abilities, but these were never installed. And after its designer passed away in 1974, this project hit a wall. The two prototypes that were built were retired in 1987, although their legacy clearly lives on in the Star Wars franchise. The ZVM-2901. All-terrain vehicles are designed to conquer everything off-road. With huge wheels or caterpillar tracks, they can make quick work of any type of terrain and look incredibly cool doing so. But back in the 1970s, in an effort to think outside the box, Soviet Russia's engineers brought the strangely screw-propelled ZVM-2901 to the table. They'd fused the cab from a UAZ-452 van with two huge hollow screw drives, the blades of which dug into the terrain and propelled the vehicle over it. The result was a vehicle that could plow through thick swamps, miles of mud, and even float over the water. Even though it was practically unstoppable, using screws cost the vehicle its speed. With a 152 horsepower engine, it could make it to just 15 miles per hour. And cruising through the water brought that down to just 6 miles per hour. It had been based on similar screw-propelled designs from history, like Chrysler's Marsh Screw Amphibian, which was abandoned because of those laughably low top speeds. That didn't deter Soviet Russia from taking a stab at it though. While the experimental design was incredibly eye-catching, Vehicle speeds and applications of tracked and tired vehicles were vastly superior, and so this screwy design was left in the past. The Kalinian K-7. Today, planes with wings spanning hundreds of feet are pretty common. All you have to do is look up and you'll see a commercial liner like a Boeing 747 with wings stretching out around 200 feet. But back in the 1930s, just 30 years after the Wright brothers proved that man could fly, Soviet Russia wheeled out the mega monstrosity that was the Kalinian K-7. It had a wingspan of more than 170 feet and a wing area of almost 5,000 square feet, which is bigger than that of a B-52 bomber. It was initially going to be powered by 7 propeller engines, with 6 along its wings and 1 planted at its rear. But as it was being built, it exceeded its maximum takeoff weight, and 2 more engines had to be added along the wing. Once constructed, the almost 27-ton Flying Fortress was the largest plane in the world. But depending on its configuration, it could be used for different missions, such as troop transport or as a gunship or a bomber. So it would have had the capacity to carry up to 120 people or around 21 tons of bombs. Unfortunately, though, it never made it into battle. The principles of flight the K-7 grappled with were just too advanced for the technology of the time, and the only prototype disastrously crashed and burned during testing. While the Soviets get points for testing out such a bold idea, this Flying Fortress was definitely a flying failure. The Tsar tank. Now, this next machine may not have been Soviet, but you can definitely tell it was made by Russia. In the middle of World War I, Russian engineers decided to build a tank the height of a 3-story house with guns that could obliterate an entire forest. The large front wheels were 30 feet in diameter, and its main body stretched back almost 60 feet to connect to a single rear wheel. 2 turrets full of cannons and machine guns were bolted on top and underneath the raised carriage. And to add the cherry on top, additional machine guns lined the armored pods on each side of the wheels to protect the tank from infantry. This was clearly the king of all tanks, and so they aptly named it the Tsar tank. But what mad idea inspired this colossal design? At the time, the Russians were looking for a way to break through the Eastern Front trench system. Instead of tanks with traditional tracks, they decided to experiment with massive spoked wheels. However, this 60-ton steel behemoth wasn't designed to be on the battlefield. Thanks to some bad engineering, that small rear wheel bore too much of the tank's enormous weight and was prone to getting stuck in soft ground and ditches. Then, during its testing phase, it got embarrassingly stuck in a field and couldn't be dug out. The Tsar tank remained rusting there throughout the war until it was finally scrapped in 1923. Now that was one really big waste. The evolution of Maz trucks. Way back in 1954, the Minsk Auto Zavod, abbreviated to Maz, was founded in Soviet-ruled Minsk. This factory produced some of the most reliable and diverse tractors of the Soviet market, often turning the vehicles into all-terrain trucks that could carry massive loads, like the Maz 529. This uniaxial engine could tow up to 34 tons of just about anything, from cement mixers to ice rinks. This caught the attention of the Soviet military, who commissioned the factory's first biaxial vehicle, the Maz 535. And this 8x8 beast of a tractor didn't spread manure, it spread munitions. At almost 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, it could carry up to 8 tons, meaning it could tow anything from tanks to massive missiles. But this wasn't Maz's final form. As the Soviet Union began making bigger ballistic missiles in the 1960s, the Maz 543 was created to carry them. As you can see, the front cabin was split into 2, though it was only driven from the left compartment. The divot this left in the middle of the truck allowed it to horizontally carry sensitive loads that weighed up to 15 tons. Although they didn't stop there. As the size of the rockets increased, so did the Maz, leading to the creation of the astonishing 12x12 Maz 547. This 6-axle truck could carry a staggering 62-ton payload, and with its 625 horsepower engine could move at a top speed of 24 miles per hour. But then, somehow, the rockets got even bigger, and so did the Maz. The next successor, the Maz 7904, was a whopping 100 feet long, 20 feet wide, and could carry missiles weighing a terrifying 200 tons. Whoa, those cabins are so far apart that this truck is starting to resemble that sloth from Ice Age. But did they stop there? Of course not. Meet the jaw-dropping 24x24 wheel 12-axle Maz 7907. This monstrous machine was designed to carry the Zelina 2 missiles, which were going to weigh over 100 tons and measure in at a staggering 74 feet long. That's almost the same size as a 6-story building. Unfortunately, the Soviet Union collapsed before the project could launch, and only a few prototype 7907s were made. This was the end of the road for the mad military Maz designs, but what a wild and wheelie ride it was.